Ravens Chiefs, and it was a big one. It came down to the wire, truly a game of inches at the very end, with a toe or even a toenail being what really stopped the Ravens from tying this game up and us getting into overtime. But the trenches, I think, were a big part of why this game ended up being what it was. And obviously we love to talk about Mahomes and Lamar Jackson and all that kinds of stuff, but what happened up front was a big telling point of what the scoreboard was at the very end of the game. When you went back and you watched this close contest between two teams that have Super Bowl aspirations, are playing at a really high level, what did you notice in the trenches that you really wanted to talk about most?
Yeah, I think obviously the Ravens line is a problem. And I think we'll talk about that probably throughout the season. I think what really jumped out to me was just how Spagnuolo attacked the issues with the offensive line mentally as much as it was physical and the play on the field. And sometimes you watch games and you say, that is a really great game plan. It's almost intellectually impressive, a great whiteboard game plan. You go, wow, this guy's really good. The thing with Spagnuolo that always jumps out to me is just how the game plan is so tied to the skill sets of his players and tied to kind of the advanced scouting of how to expose issues in the opposition. So what he did to just put particularly those three interior guys, mostly the two guards, into just complete binds, knowing that was a weak point of the offensive line, knowing I could move pieces around, knowing that if we could get Lamar slightly frazzled, then we could kind of throw a curveball going into the second half. And he kind of really changed things up as they went through the game in terms of how trying to expose that offensive line. So I just thought all around tying kind of the scheme game plan to the skills of the players was as good as you'll see.
Now, the Ravens, when I was looking at their PFF grades just as a whole from the offensive line, and we'll get to the interior guys because I do think that's a great point that you mentioned. Their overall offensive line grades, I believe, were ranked 24th on the week now that we have all the games in there. And they gave up the fifth most pressure. They gave up 15 pressures in total last week. And Steve Spagnuolo is one of the best defensive coordinators in the game, right? About just using his defensive linemen, and I would even say overall front seven players, because we see this with Nick Bolton when Willie Gay was there, right? We see it with Leo Chanel. Like, just they're not afraid to use their guys in so many different ways and different alignments. I mean, for goodness sake, we all saw the meme of Justice Hill going one-on-one with Chris Jones, and it's like, how did we get to that point? And I think a lot of people were sort of dunking on the Ravens a little bit for that, but I don't think that was by design from the Ravens. They didn't know that was going to happen. I think that was a Steve Spagnuolo kind of masterpiece right there. But when you look at how the Ravens struggled, in particular to what they want to do as a football team, again, just was it more of you just got a hat tip to one of the best defensive coordinators in the game in Spagnuolo, or was it something that you are still really concerned with the Ravens that they just have to get better at?
Yeah, I'm concerned with the one-on-one talent for sure. I just don't think it's good enough. I don't think it's athletic enough, and I think that's a real issue. What I will say with Spagnuolo is kind of his imprint going into the game was, we are going to leave the interior guys uncovered. We're going to have these giant bubbles in the B gap, and we're going to wander people around. Guys will walk in there, walk out, we'll run overload fronts, all kind of cool, creative, exotic things. But when you look at the blitz rate, you look at the pressure rate, and you look at the paths, that's kind of something I always go through is forget the overall rate. What was the intent of the rate, right? Is it all concentrated in one area? Is it flying guys from all different angles? His entire game plan was, I want to penetrate the B gap bubble where I can get, it's so much easier as an offensive coach to say, if you've got guys you think maybe aren't quite up to it, or they're starting their first game or whatever it is, if there's a guy right over them, right, it's pretty easy. You just say, hey, that's your guy. We just figure it out. If they have to start thinking and reacting whilst panicking, it's my first game in the NFL, I'm starting, oh Lord, Chris Jones is huge and he's quick. How do I do this? He made those guys think. And that was a real problem for them. No one knew who to pick up. And not only is he making those guys think and looking around different angles, where a body's coming from, why is that guy bluffing? He's supposed to come. It's also putting a lot on Lamar Jackson, who has more responsibility than since college at the line of scrimmage. In college, he ran the entire offense for the line of scrimmage. He's not done that in the league. So this year, protections are all on him. So Steve Spagnuolo was saying, okay, you figure out the protections. I'm going to make the young guys think and play on the move. And they just weren't athletic enough. And immediately you could see all their technique and mechanics just vanish as they panic, trying to figure out who they're supposed to pick up.
Yeah, and I mean, like you mentioned, like that's an unfortunate sort of like reaction when coaches talk about this all the time, right? They want guys playing free. When you have to sit there and think about it, normally it's so much hesitation that now all of a sudden, like, that's all the difference in the world, right? The league is too good. You're going up against the best in the world. If you give them just a split second of hesitation, whether it's in coverage, whether it's a quarterback's throw, whether it's, a juke in open field, or like you said, handling something in the trenches, sometimes that could mean all the difference in the world. From what you're talking about, it does, just to give Ravens fans some hope here, it does seem like those issues are sort of chemistry issues. And maybe we get to the point where it is just like an individual thing. Hey, these guys aren't really able to hold up individually, which I want to get to another point about that in a second. But they are starting 3 new offensive linemen, right? Patrick Mekar, Daniel Falele playing right guard now, and then Andrew Voorhees as well. So it is 3 new offensive linemen in that starting lineup. So is it something where again, I want to get to the individual talent in a second, but you watch it and you go, yeah, they're just very clearly not communicating the way that they need to pre-snap, maybe pointing things out correctly, maybe they guessed incorrectly with who was coming and who wasn't, or passing things off correctly when it comes to stunts and twists, or whatever defensive coaching terminology you want to throw out there for it. Is it something where you feel as though as the season goes on, chemistry could definitely help mitigate what we saw against Kansas City when it comes to Baltimore?
Yeah, definitely with that stuff, right? The communication stuff, picking things up post-snap, just almost having built-in breakers. A lot of what offensive coordinators will do will start learning really quickly, like, hey, on these kind of concepts, my right guard gets nailed. So we'll just move the quarterback landmark slightly. You start kind of adjusting the nuances of your system to be like, there's certain stuff where guys don't hold up as well as they do on other things. So you can start as an entire staff, start figuring out things to make everyone kind of look better. I would way rather have full continuity than just kind of have everyone be above average at all the different spots and you're kind of chopping and changing every week. I would just rather have the continuity and we can build and work around that. And we have a guy who can make magic happen in the backfield, as he did on Thursday night. So that's going to help us out too. I just think there's an athletic base and floor that you have to hit. And I just don't think they've got it at right tackle. And the Falale experiment at right guard is just like, that is just a hit or miss, right? That's not something you can kind of figure out with communication. You have a giant guy who is giving up natural leverage and isn't quick off the ball. So then what can we do when the entire league can go back and watch the film and say we leave the B gap open and then we start bringing flies and swoopers and he doesn't know where to be? That is something that's going to take a ton of reps to be able to figure out if he can actually line up at that spot.
Yeah, when you said that attacking the B gap bubble, what is, explain that a little bit more, just so to understand sort of kind of what you're talking about here and how the Chiefs put a lot of the guard play for the Ravens in conflict that game.
Yeah, so it's just the gap on the outside shoulder of the guard. And usually, particularly in base downs, you would have that cover. That's kind of the main goal point of a lot of interior runs, is you want to kind of burst through the B gap bubble. It's why teams have kind of changed their front structures in recent years. Leaving that completely vacated on passing downs is pretty unusual, right? Teams usually get into some kind of 4-man front and they have split defensive tackles and they fill those two. And even if you're attacking and swooping, that's not often where you will go for it. So it was slightly unusual. And it was more about how they would adjust kind of walking and roaming and meandering around. There was like not a lot of intensity or intent from the Chiefs pre-snap. It was kind of like one guy would wander in there, then he'd wander out. And it was just trying to force those guys to communicate as much as possible pre and post snap. And I think it gave them real problems. And then as the game goes along, they actually, I thought, did a decent job in the third quarter. It was like they had a chance to go away, communicate, figure some things out. They did okay then. Then Spagnuolo flips it on them again, and they start running all these really kooky, creative things that we see a bunch in college with these kind of layered pressures, the odd mirror stuff people may have heard about, which is basically a funnel pressure where you're trying to build your entire front to push the quarterback to one place. Someone can just come and play cleanup. So now you have guys communicating well, but communicating something that means they know exactly where the quarterback is going to be. So it can get really bogged down in the details, I understand, but they were just way behind in terms of the mental side of the game. And when they were figuring things out, Spags threw something new at them, and there was no real answer for them.
Which, again, does make sense, right? And when we talk about, if Ravens fans might be listening to this, it's not total gloom and doom about it. It's an experienced Chiefs defensive front that's still working with the same defense coordinator who's been there for a really long time, and they're still trying to figure it out. You mentioned, Daniel Falele playing that right guard spot. Unfortunately for them, and unfortunately for game one, I think that the reason why you would move Falele into a full-time right guard spot is because of the size, right? It's because of the power. It's what the Ravens want to do. They want to beat you up front. They want to run the football. A lot of people talked about, okay, in the game against Kansas City in the playoffs, they sort of got away from their identity in that regard. And so you knew they were going to kind of get back to it, right? You signed Derrick Henry, and I know John Harbaugh came out and said, oh, we're not going to give him 30 carries a game, but they want to run the football, right? They want to be a running team. And when you look at those three new offensive linemen, a takeaway that I had for the Ravens game is that all of them, Makari, Daniel Falele, Andrew Voorhees, all of them, run blocking grades below 60. And if anything, you would kind of think, all right, at least I'm getting good run blocking production from Falele as an example because of his size. I'm at least getting that. So you understood kind of what the Ravens were doing. And you probably thought to yourself, or they probably thought to themselves, all right, we'll sacrifice a little bit in the pass blocking game. He's not going to be able to move as well. He is giving up that natural leverage, which I think can be tough, but he's just such a massive dude. I think they were hoping to get a lot more production and positively graded plays from the run game. And they didn't get that part from their new guys either, which I think was a detriment to sort of what the Ravens wanted to do, independent even of what Spagnuolo and the Chiefs were doing.
Yeah, exactly. And it comes down to just players. You know, you can have all the fun schematic stuff in the world, and Spags does, and that's why it was such difficulty in pass pro. But you're just facing a front that was just dominant. I mean, they were just talked up, firing off the ball. Chris Jones is all over the place, lining up in 20 different spots, it felt like.
Yeah.
Carl Laftis was zooming off the ball. Wharton inside was an absolute menace. They had no one who could handle him. All those guys played in different spots. The linebackers were flying everywhere. And so it's just really tough. They just don't have great inline power. Even when, they put Rosengarten in, it's a different style of player at right tackle, but it's not a bunch of boom off the ball. And I don't think Falale, the idea would be, can you get him to kind of a Mailata type level? That is just a complete grader out there, right? And then can he hang in? Is he springy enough to get out and hang in pass pro? That's the style you'd look for. You move it inside. Everything is so quick. Those guys are so fast off the ball. As you mentioned, they've got the natural leverage advantage. He just doesn't bring thunder. That's a twitched up thing, even in that kind of mass. To be able to actually bring thunder off the ball, you can't be slow and cumbersome. And to me, when I watch him, his just feet are so heavy, and that is like almost old school left tackle play, right? And they've stuck it at right guard as kind of their lead front side guy, and it just isn't really adding up for me.
There is something to that, I think. Certainly doing this from an NFL draft perspective as well, when we evaluate people, I think that you look at offensive linemen and offensive line recruits, and they'll be 330, 335, 340, 345, whatever. Like, they'll get up there and wait, and a lot of people say, like, oh my gosh, just the size and the power that these guys have. And it doesn't always translate. The phrase that you use there, bring the thunder or whatever, like, that is something that's very real. You still got to be able to get down, get low, be able to fire off and really create some of that power. And just because you are tipping the scale, maybe even above 340, 350, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're coming off the ball with bad intentions and that you got great explosiveness there. So I think that is also a really good point and something to monitor sort of with the Ravens and some of the guys that they've got out there. Rosengarten, you brought up his name, obviously the rookie that they drafted. They got high hopes for him, but I was surprised that they drafted him because he's not their type of offensive lineman. Like, he is much more of a lighter finesse player. Now, to the point that you just brought up, Rosengarten can get off the ball. Like, he's got some good explosiveness. He's got some springiness to him, but what he was good at Washington was a lot of like the quick footwork, being balanced, being able to hit a landmark at his pass sets. It wasn't necessarily getting off the ball and really moving people in run blocking, but I think they probably drafted him to develop that part of his game. I just don't think I'd expect it in year one. You probably got to go through a full year of being in their system, probably gaining a little bit of weight, training the right way. And so we'll see how it is for Baltimore. Any final thoughts before we kind of wrap up this game and get to another guy?
No, I just think we mentioned Wharton slightly. I think that is just a guy to continue watching. He plays more snaps than Chris Jones, plays up and down the front the same way Chris Jones does, crazy off the ball, to find that guy undrafted. I don't know how they do this every single year. They just find studs from somewhere you've never heard of the college before, you've never heard the name before. All of a sudden, they're making plays in the backfield. It's just uncanny the way they can do this.
Brett Veach truly has one of the best scouting staffs in the business. There's no doubt about it. People, they talk about Andy Reid, they talk about Patrick Mahomes, Travis Kelce, Chris Jones. You need those players to win Super Bowls. There's no doubt about it. But just like the Brady years with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, yeah, Brady came over, but it was a damn good team when Brady did come over. It takes a full team, and obviously the Chiefs are doing a fantastic job.